This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. Sarah, we have today possibly one of the most important messages to discuss and to review, and the headline of it is the corporate legacy. And before we get into it, let's introduce ourselves. I am Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, the voice of Respectonomics, joined by Sarah Benton, who is my co-host. And frankly, in this most beautiful October morning, a few days before Halloween, I can say, good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Jeremy. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. What I want to talk about is this. This message is designed for people in the sort of leadership role in corporations, political life, business life, organizational life, shall we say, generally. And it came about because a week ago we talked about personal legacy. And we talked about some of the techniques of making sure that your estate moves along nicely and freely and easily and so on. And that was fairly straightforward. We had a great response to that. The point that's coming out, however, is we never hear the expression, at least I have never heard the expression, the corporate legacy. And I'm going to defer to you with all your human resource technicalities and backgrounds. I don't think you're familiar with it either.
I don't think I've heard anything termed in that phrase.
Right. Well, I'm going to add one little point because it's in one sense it's relevant, one not. We're going to have a new website developed. And what's interesting is that we, Respectonomics, as you know, now own the domain corporatelegacy.ca. And the interesting thing about that is the fact that we did get it. Not that I think it's very useful, but I think the issue is, to me, interesting that it hadn't already been taken.
Okay.
So, with that in mind, I want to be very clear about something, Sarah, and I know you've been pressing on this point. In fact, the whole Dignity Trust team has been pushing on this, and that is where the business of Respectonomics is to restore dignity to the human being. And all we're talking about when we say corporation, it's a multiplication of the individual. In other words, if you have lots of people, you have an organization. So what applies individually applies in aggregate. It applies across the whole screen. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that corporations, I'm going to focus on the word corporations, but people listening can probably say, well, this includes political entities, charitable entities, but any entity you can think of, really. But have you noticed when you pick up your local business commentary in either a newspaper or on Facebook or whatever, have you noticed how incredibly critical people are of corporations?
Yes, absolutely.
It's like a sort of what do they call it? A 6-gun revolver going off all the time. And the thing we want to emphasize with Respectonomics is, no, we're drawing alongside. We want to be the ones that help people to be able to navigate through these very, very complex times. These are times where we've got cultural changes taking place every morning. We've got volatility in the markets, got volatility in how people vote, how people think. The consumer has become ever fickle. So when you add all this together, what we're really saying is our responsibility, if we're going to talk about dignity, then we need to draw alongside the corporation and be the ones to help them deal with not only their strengths, but to also be able to navigate them out of the rocks and the storms of life. How do you feel about that?
Agreed.
Oh, well, that was easy.
I think the support it's tremendously needed. And I think it's that, again, that Respectonomics is looking at coming at it from the vantage point of from that perspective versus we're challenging the corporation. We're challenging them from the vantage point of be aware of what the challenges are. However, we're here to support you and support your business and support the employees, so support the collective.
That's exactly how I feel. No, that's exactly what I believe.
Right.
That where our responsibility is not only to draw alongside, but to use your word, to support.
Hmm.
And I want to be as the voice of Respectonomics, with the team behind me, I want to be very clear that that is our purpose and our intention. So, with that in mind, let's talk about this unusual expression, the corporate legacy.
Okay.
And I was reading this morning about a lady who has a lovely piece of jewelry that she inherited or used to belong to her, I think, great great grandmother. And the significance is she's very proud of it. She's proud of where it came from. She's proud of the fact that she now has it. She
Hmm.
loves the provenance of it. She loves the whole sense of continuity. And that's the part that we want to emphasize in corporate legacy. If you use the word legacy, I think there's a horrible instinct to think, oh, you mean it has died? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means it's a carry through. And if you think of the organization today, it's an organization that deals with or works with the idea of being a caretaker. We think of if you talk to your board of directors, they are the trustees of the organization. They're the ones who you would say are the guardians. So when you accumulate these sort of what would you call them, philosophies together, these cultures, you end up with the idea that every corporation wants to have a legacy. I don't think that's extraordinary. It's
Hmm.
just what is extraordinary is that we don't hear that expression.
Right.
What I'd like to do with you, please, Sarah, is talk a bit about what is the idea then behind this legacy. If we agree that having a legacy is something that we can be extremely proud of, and the corporation, the political party, they can express exactly the same sentiment. If that is the case, let's take a look at what they're actually doing today. Because presumably, if I talk about my personal legacy, it is an expression of what I am doing today and what I did yesterday. I think that's mathematically the case, don't you?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if we agree that what we're doing today formula is the sort of the formula for the legacy tomorrow, let's think about what we are doing today. And we've already talked about the fact that we are guardians, that we are the caretakers. You know, we own a farm. And somebody said to me one day, yes, this individual said to me, it's wonderful that you own the farm, but you're actually holding it in trust for future generations. And I
Okay.
think as an approach to how we run the business, how we run political life, to think of it in terms of the trusteeship for future generations is a valuable tool.
Okay.
So moving along then, if we look at the business today, what I did was I paralleled it with, well, what does an individual do? An individual, when they put their legacy together, they think in terms of, telling people where their savings accounts are and all that. We're not going to go down that path for a very practical reason. Corporations do that extremely well.
Yeah.
They have regulatory, bureaucratic, administrative processes that tell everybody where everything is. So we're not going to get caught up in that detail. The detail we're going to get caught up in is two things. The first one is if I'm putting my will together, one of the things you would say to me is, Jeremy, who are your beneficiaries? To which I ask the same question of the corporation. Who are your beneficiaries? And here is one of the most important insights into the whole business of business. And that is the beneficiaries of the corporation I'll read them off to you. They are the customer. And you can say yes or no as we go through this. It's
Okay.
nine beneficiaries. There's the customer, the employee, the shareholder, the supplier, the community, society, the environment, the medical community, the educational community, the fitness. By fitness, I'm talking about both mental and physical, and dignity. I think a corporation that leaves dignity on the table is a corporation that, by the very nature of the word dignity, is worth everything that it is.
Hmm.
Fabulous asset to leave on the table. But here's the crucial point. We've just identified the beneficiaries of the organization. Are you with me?
Yes.
If one of those beneficiaries is not included, I will put to you the business will fail.
Okay.
In a period of time, it will. Let's take an aerospace manufacturer, a Boeing, if you will. If Boeing mucks around with the environment, presumably there's a point at which Boeing will no longer be able to fly. That's
A
pretty
problem.
much, yeah, it's a very big problem. And it raises other issues. It raises not only the efficacy, the productivity of the business, but it also, in that particular case, it deals extensively with human safety. So in other words, the beneficiaries that we've just identified, they need to be treated. Now, here's the important word. They don't need to be treated equally. Because in actual fact, if anybody's putting a will together, trying to treat your beneficiaries equally is virtually impossible for lots of different reasons. But what you do is you allocate and you distribute. That's what legacy means. It's a process of distribution. You do it equitably,
Mm,
meaning it's fair to all concerned. The Rotary motto is it fair to all concerned? And
right.
I think when you look at the beneficiaries here, that is a very good approach. So when you're running your business and you think of your beneficiaries and you think in terms of, the shareholder, the society, the environment, and you start putting these all together, two things happen. One is, I think there's a very reasonable chance that the company, the business, will be making terrific decisions. Let me put it another way. If a corporation is not paying attention to its legacy and it's the distribution of to its beneficiaries, when that doesn't happen, you end up with Hudson's Bay Company, one of the most venerable companies that, goes back to the 1600s, a wonderful company, and they didn't have a legacy plan. And now the world is like a vulture and it's picking away at the pieces. It no longer exists.
Right.
So the legacy issue is vital for running the business, number one. Number two, one of the great advantages of thinking in terms of a legacy is you think externally rather than internally. One of the greatest problems of running a business or being in business, whatever you're at, whether you're a supplier, the shareholder, or whatever, that question that so often comes up is, what's in it for me? And the trouble with what's in it for me is it doesn't take long before that becomes self-entitlement, self-aggrandizement, isolationist. I mean, all the nasties come along with it. So in other words, when we think legacy, we are now thinking, not only are we thinking outside of ourselves, but we're also thinking of the longer run. That's very healthy.
Mm,
It's morally healthy, but I'll tell you something, it's commercially healthy. Because when you start putting these pieces together, I found out one thing in running business and life and so on. When it's morally right, it usually ends up being commercially right. The two have to be in they're either side of the coin, basically. So if we agree then that the importance of a legacy, the importance of sharing with all the beneficiaries on an equitable basis, then we have a basis for great improvements, enhancements taking place in the organization. Now, one of the threads to that is, here am I grandly saying, what a legacy should look like. Actually, I think that's not appropriate. I think the people that should be discussing the legacy should be the people who are in the business. In other words, why wouldn't we, and I've never been asked this, is as an employee, could be a supplier, but let's just take the employee. Because most of us are employees.
mhm.
Have you ever been asked, what kind of legacy do you want this business to leave?
Never.
No. And I think we should ask that, because when you do that, then you're reaching into the whole area of inclusiveness and something else I've discovered, or Respectonomics has discovered. And it's a blaring truth that in the whole corridor of one's employees, whether they are marked as high, low, well paid, underpaid, indifferent, whatever it is, Have you noticed that in your breadth of employees, there's an incredible amount of talent? It's incredible. Some of the like that happened to me last week when I think I told you when I was in the coffee shop and the lady who was really engaging. But then when I commented on that and said, under the heading of Respectonomics, I'm fascinated by good service. And
Right.
she looked at me and she pointed at the coffee and the sandwich and she said, well, they don't really count. It's the service.
Mhm. Agreed.
I mean, what a brilliant, brilliant insight. I actually wrote to the company, wrote to the CEO, and got back a very nice answer. And I believe that my recommendation or commendation has been referred back to the individual, which
Very
is that's correct. That should happen.
Yes.
But Sarah, I think we need to be asked, what kind of legacy do you want? We could find that in the political circuit. When have we, as voters, what are we, constituents, when have we been asked, what kind of legacy would you like to see this country leave? And it doesn't matter whether you're Canadian or whether you're French or American or whatever. What
Mm.
kind of legacy would you like to see? It's a lovely question, and why don't we have everybody participating in it?
Right.
Now, the other thing I want to say is that when I was going through the what I call the personal legacy and looking at it through this corporate filter, and I say, this is designed to help the corporation. These are what I call actually what would you call them? Easy questions.
Mhm.
You don't need an MBA or anything. I think you can just, say, my goodness, is this going to work in the long run? And even that expression, the long run, so many businesses today, and I'm not blaming them, the pressures are incredible. It's true politically. How many decisions are made today that are what I call knee-jerk reactions?
Mm.
I think you see a lot of that. But when you look in Asia, for example, have you noticed they play the long game?
Mm.
We need to be playing the long game, and by definition, the legacy is the long game. So that's part of why you want to get into legacy thinking, because it allows you to go into the long game. But there's a couple of other thoughts. One of them is Baxter Drug Company years ago. They had a great, great expression, which was they required their salespeople to have sales of 30, or at least their revenues, 30% of their sales in 5 years' time would be in products that don't even exist today.
Okay.
Well, that's a brilliant line, because what that's saying is 1/3 of your existing products will in fact die out. So you need to replace them. So you're thinking in terms of new products and how you're going to sell them over the next 5 years. That's part of the long game, and it's part of legacy thinking. We're going to have new products on the shelf, and we're excited about them. So there again, that is, I mean, in a business sense, it's brilliant.
Right.
Look at today in the electric car. I don't think anybody has a clue whether the EV, as they call it, the electric vehicle, is going to make it or not. But my goodness, the trillions that have been spent in that industry and are currently going down the drain,
Right.
because I don't think enough legacy thinking went into it at the outset. Major battery companies are now going bankrupt. If
Right.
we don't think in terms of legacy, if we don't think in terms of that 30% factor, frankly, we're running a gamble. We're running a casino. So the next thing I want to say is this. I had an Uncle David. I think everybody's had one Uncle David in their life, yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Well,
actually got an Uncle David.
well, Uncle David was extraordinarily successful, and if I put it into the sort of the vernacular, was very, let's just say, very wealthy. Let's just say that. Anyway, I said to him one day, I said, what is the basis of your success in your business? And it's an answer that I hope everybody can hear. It floored me. It still floors me. And he said in that delightful, drawly voice, do I have a drawly voice, by the way?
Not at all.
Oh, well, can I make a drawly voice?
Sure.
But he said in his drawly voice, he said, oh, Jeremy, he said, he was a senior partner, whenever we make a decision, it has to be fair to the new people joining the firm.
Mm.
And then he stopped and said, looked up and he said, "You see, Jeremy, we've had our turn." What a brilliant analysis
Mhm.
of life, harmony, a corporate continuity, and why it was so brilliant. I mean, it sounds like a sort of, a sort of moral podium, but actually why it was so brilliant was, guess what? They ended up making brilliant decisions and he got even richer.
Well, if you think about it, that's legacy thinking right there.
Right there. Absolutely brilliant. So, what I'd like to do, if I may, I think I'm going to sort of conclude because I think we've probably, there's one other thing, and that is we think in terms of legacies, foundations are an important part of that. One of the things that a corporation can do or a government can do is think about what is it, what hallmark would you like to see expressed in the years to be? And we've talked a bit about how you would ask people that. But one of the things we can think about is also the foundations.
Mm.
Foundation whereby you do have a financial resource that allows people to contribute and where money can come out to support what that corporation thinks is important. It might be the environment, it might be individuals that are displaced, it could be any number of things. But I think that sort of foundational continuity is part of that whole expression of a legacy of which people can be very proud.
Right.
I think, if I may, I'm going to sign off with our usual sign off, which is I rest my case. But I want to put one thought more with this. If I look around the world today, Sarah, and I'll ask you if you agree with this or not. I think I see a lot of suppression and I see a lot of despair, a lot of fear. And if I had to say the one word missing from the menu, it's hope.
Mm.
Would you? I think it's a fair comment to say hope is on the sort of the liability side of life's balance sheet.
Right.
When we think in terms of this legacy approach, we are giving substance to hope. You can't very well put a legacy plan together if it's not under the heading of hope.
Right.
Otherwise, you wouldn't even try and do it. So they're like the two sides of the coin. You have the legacy on one side, and it's built upon the hope on the other side. And that's a wonderful legacy to be able to leave to the community at large. A legacy that stands on hope and a legacy that stands on dignity. I think then we would say, not that I rest my case, and you wouldn't say, I rest my case, but I think we, in the broad scheme of things, in a legacy sense, can say, yeah, we rest our case.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, sir.